Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Grip Media. My name is John McGurk. I'm joined as ever for the week that really was by my colleague and friend, Sarah Ryan. It is the 28th of November, 2024. We are recording this on election eve. By the time you're watching it, you've probably already cast your vote. We will talk about the election later on in this program. We will give some predictions as to how we think it's going to go. We'll also talk a little bit about Conor McGregor, a little bit about a guy called Greg Wallace, who has been suspended today from MasterChef in the UK. And we'll talk a little bit about the assisted suicide bill that will be voted on this evening, Friday the 29th, in the United Kingdom. Before I start this podcast and before I say hello to Sarah, I just wanted to thank all of you who sent us very kind words of condolence this week on the passing of our friend and colleague, Michael Dwyer. We read them all. We were really appreciative. And just on behalf of everyone here at Grip, thank you for that. Sarah, how are you?
I'm tired. This 3-week campaign has felt like about 6 months, and it has somehow managed to feel really long, but yet be really boring at the same time. So
yeah, you're like Simon Harrison, Count Turk. You're tired, emotional, and cranky, and ready to tell me to go away.
Yeah, exactly. But it's been dull and kind of ready for it to be over, even though I anticipate, and we can get to this at the end, that we will be subjected to about 8 months worth of government negotiations of nonsense, and that will be equally tiring. But for now, I'm glad this is over, for the voting.
Well, bear in mind, it won't be over for us for a while, because I'll plug this now rather than plugging it at the end. On Saturday at the Count in the RDS, Sarah and I will be there. We'll be live from about 10:30 in the morning, and with you throughout the day. And that won't be Sarah and I the whole day because we'll be very tired. But the whole Grip team will be there. If you like Ben, prefer him to me, as many of you do, he'll be coming on our live stream. Fatima will be here. Neve will be here in the afternoon. Laura Parents will be joining us. She's always great fun. And so we'll be there for the whole day so you can keep abreast. And look, if you don't like RTE, we'll give you another option. So we'd be honoured if you would join us for coverage of the results all day Saturday. But we'll get to the election later on. I wanted to start by turning to some topics. Actually, a topic that we kind of missed last week just because of how things fell was the whole Conor McGregor trial. Now, obviously, if you're a Grip Media fan, you may have seen the podcast on the actual trial I did with Fatima and the aforementioned Laura Perrins at the weekend. Many of you watched that, and thank you very much for it. But Sarah, you haven't got to weigh in, and I thought it was interesting this week that Dee Devlin, Conor McGregor's long-term partner and mother of his children and girlfriend, weighed in with quite a strong attack on Nikita Hand, the victim in that case. What was your reaction to the result of the trial, and what's your reaction as to where things stand now?
I mean, my reaction to the result of the trial was that it is what it is. I mean, the jury were going to decide based on the evidence that was presented to them what they were going to do, and they did. And I wasn't surprised. I was not surprised. I was kind of indifferent to it. But on the subject of Dee Devlin, what I think is interesting about this is that, ultimately, I don't think that many people would argue with the concept that we're looking at somebody who is in a very unpleasant relationship. You couldn't, this is a woman who has spent weeks and weeks and weeks sitting at home. She came for the day of the result of the verdict, but she's been sitting at home while the papers and the public poured over information that, and it wasn't that commented on, that while she was pregnant with her second child, her partner was going off and having sex with other women. Right. Obviously, whether or not that sex was consensual or not was the subject of this trial. But ultimately, regardless of all of that, her partner, while she's pregnant with her second child, is off on the bag for long 3-day bender and having sex with another woman. And I think that is deeply humiliating, deeply disrespectful. And I don't think that most people can kind of comprehend what she's thinking being with a guy who treats her so badly. So then this week she puts up on her Instagram, a 3 story rant about the victim in this case and how she should have been at home with her children and she was chasing after my man, Dee refers to Conor as. And I just think that Dee is a victim in all of this. And obviously what she's saying there is very foolish and she shouldn't have done that and she shouldn't be victim blaming another woman, and that all goes without saying. But I think the thing that's important to note is that sometimes women who are, in difficult or unpleasant or hard situations relationship wise, they don't act in the way that you want them to. It's not like victims don't always come in a night, present themselves as a nice, in a nice package. And she's been humiliated for weeks, and I'm not surprised that she's felt the need to kick out. And I feel bad for her. I mean, I think that it's been deeply humiliating. I think that, he has been the subject of rumors about their relationship for years. And I think that this whole trial and the entire, detail of it for everyone to pour over has been horrific for her as the mother of his children. And I think that it's not a surprise that she's done something, even though it's not, obviously not ideal by any stretch of the imagination, and she shouldn't be doing it. I think that people could give her a little bit of a break considering her situation. That's just my opinion.
Yeah. I wrote my most read piece of the year this week on the subject of that trial. I mean, people can't get enough of talking about it. And then they say, why are you talking about it? Well, the answer is you can't get enough of us talking about it, because every time we write about it, every time we post about it, every time we tweet about it, every time we publish an article, it's the most read thing that day. I mean, people can't get enough of talking about this. And my most read article of the year that I've written basically said, look, the time for Conor McGregor, defending Conor McGregor, is over. If you are like me, a centre-right, vaguely conservative, vaguely nationalist person, and maybe you agreed with Conor McGregor about some of the things he said in the last year about immigration or the state of the country and all those things. I mean, you can say things that are broadly true, but also disqualify yourself from public leadership.
Of course.
I mean, his own defense, if you just take his own defense in that trial and listen to nothing the other side said, like if you believe every word he said, then he behaved like a person who is unfit for any kind of public leadership role. He used and abused that woman. And that's if he didn't rape her. He picks a girl up, he takes her back to a hotel. By his own account, I mean, she forgot to take out a tampon. So either her version is right, which is he raped her, or his version is right, which is she was so out of her own mind that she forgot to take out a tampon. Then he uses her for sex. Then he leaves her there with his mate and goes home again to his pregnant long-term partner.
He's in a relationship. He's in a relationship with a child, another child on the way. I mean, I don't, but I think that that's a form of abuse. That you would humiliate your partner like that. It's just horrendous. And it smacks to me of, and the treatment and the vitriol towards Dee this week by women. I've seen it on Instagram. Just smacks to me of this thing of, feminism, but only for the women we like and agree with. Politics, but only for more women in politics, but only the women we like and agree with. Victimhood, but only for the women we like and agree with. You don't have to like her. You don't have to like him, but you can say, this whole situation seems very, very odd that she would allow herself to be humiliated like that and stay with him. And maybe she deserves some sympathy. That doesn't mean that
maybe they're saying, maybe some of these women are saying, the other woman
doesn't deserve sympathy.
I'm just going to play devil's advocate. I mean, maybe some of these women who are critics of hers are saying, look, we think you're quite happy to put up with all this in return for the money, the bling, the fast cars, the houses and the holidays overseas.
But how do we know?
Well, they don't. But I'm saying, I think that maybe that's where some of it is coming from.
I mean, she's been with him. She's been with him since he was poor. She was, cleaning his whatever, doing his laundry. And I remember seeing an interview where he would talk about how she paid the rent. As far as I remember, she paid the rent. She made his meals. She helped him. She did his laundry, and she set him up. So she wasn't. It's not like she rocked up when he was worth 50 million and is now just taking it. She's been with him a long time. We don't know anything about their relationship. I just think that it's not, and I'm not saying that this is necessarily the case. It might not be the case, but I just think that it's not beyond the realms of control or of possibility that she's in a very, unpleasant relationship. That's at least partially obvious from this trial. And, I think that the pack just turns on her in a way that, in 2 years' time, if she came out and said he was a big bad bully the whole time and she was afraid of her life or whatever, then they'd all fall all over again. But sometimes victims and people who are in tough, difficult situations just don't present themselves in the way you want. That's it. We're constantly told about, coercive control and all these different concepts that can exist in a relationship. And now we see a woman whose husband or partner is out sleeping with other women and going on 3-day benders while she's pregnant. I mean, that to me is a form of, at the very minimum, disrespect to the level of abuse, in my opinion. And she took that, and maybe she's just not in a great situation and she deserves a bit of a break. Obviously what she said is stupid. Obviously she shouldn't be on Instagram saying, criticizing the other woman. That's obvious. But I still think we don't know anything about her situation, and I don't know. I just wouldn't be passing comment on it because we don't know what's going on behind the scenes there.
Yeah. And there's another woman in this, of course, who's the victim of the court found her to be a victim, Nikita Hand, who has had... I've seen some of the stuff being written this week, and I got some pushback on my own piece from Conor McGregor fans who are still Conor McGregor fans. And what they were saying was, look, Conor McGregor behaved badly, but even if you believe that what the jury found was correct, which I, for the record, do, she should still be criticised for putting herself in that situation. That's essentially what they were saying. And I just want to address it because, lads, I'm writing for other men here. Like, you will find situations in life because you're bigger, stronger, faster. You hold your drink better than maybe girls, where you will find women who are in a vulnerable situation. And I think the mark of a man in that circumstance is what you do and what you don't do. And I think you can say everything you want about Nikita Hand's choices that night, some of which I don't think were very good. But I think we have to, as a society, be able to say what you do when you encounter a person who's smaller, vulnerable, less privileged than you are. I don't want to use privilege in the left-wing sense, but it has less power in that situation than you do.
Yeah.
It says a lot about you as a character. So I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear all this nonsense about what Nikita Hand did or didn't do. By Conor McGregor's own account, he took advantage of her. That's his own account. That's the non-criminal version. That's the I didn't commit any crimes. I just took advantage of this poor girl who was drunk and up off her head on cocaine, and we had very athletic, energetic sex. Then I left her behind and went home to my girlfriend. You're still a shithead.
Yeah, and here's the thing that I would say is most men wouldn't have done what he did.
I agree.
So what is it? Do you know what I mean? Is it him? Because if most men wouldn't have done it, well then obviously it's shitty behaviour.
Anyway, we move on because I want to go. We're not just anti-man on this podcast because I want to defend a particular man. I do. I don't watch this MasterChef program, Sarah. I think you do. But this guy, Greg Wallace, apparently he's a big cheese on MasterChef in the UK. And he has had to take a leave of absence from that job after allegations of historic sexual abuse were investigated. And I saw this story today. I saw it and I was like, another one bites the dust. He's been, putting moves on the secretaries, or he's been taking advantage, or he's been doing something. He's been propositioning people maybe. And it's not that at all. We find out today that basically 17 years ago, this guy is accused of having made a series of inappropriate sexual comments in the workplace. And you dig deeper and you read The Guardian, and it turns out that what he's done is he's told some dirty jokes, and he once joked in front of a junior staffer that he wasn't wearing underwear under his jeans. Now, is it just me, Sarah, or have we gone off the deep end here? That people are being investigated for making essentially maybe innuendos and dirty jokes 17 years ago. 17 years ago. Like, have we all lost our mind? Is this... is anyone safe? Because I am fairly certain that at some point in the last 20 years, I've made a dirty joke to a member of the opposite sex. Fairly sure of it. Like, should I be worried? Should we all be worried?
Well, I mean, I think it's just...
I think I've told you several dirty jokes, like, if you want to get rid of me.
And I've told you. Why do you assume I'm the victim? Maybe you're the victim of my dirty jokes.
Yeah.
But like, I think this. I am 41 and I've been working since I'm, I suppose in some form, 15, 16. Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to say that in the entire of my work life, and just before anybody gets any ideas, absolutely nothing to do with any political job I ever had. But I had a job at one point where there was a serious sexual harassment issue that I had with an much older man. And when sexual harassment is happening, you know all about it. There's no blurred lines. There's no kind of like, was that a bit inappropriate or whatever? You know all about it. And so when people do this kind of garbage 17 years later, it's really, really bad for loads of reasons. it's bad. It undermines the credibility of people who are actually being sexually harassed in a serious way in their job. And also it makes light of it as a concept, like telling a joke or saying that you weren't wearing any underwear. First of all, let's just say that this happened last week. Is it a bit inappropriate? Yeah, okay, maybe. But is it a sackable offense? Should you be suspended from your job from it? I don't think so. If somebody said that to me in a work environment, it wouldn't particularly bother me. But like, I'm not going to speak for everyone. Maybe it would bother some people. But this was 17 years ago. 17 years ago. I mean, so somebody held on for 17 years to the information that he'd made a joke, remembered it for 17 years, and decides now is the time to make a complaint about it. I'm sorry, I'm just going to call bullshit on that.
I think I was talking about this with somebody during the week before this story broke. And I was reminded of something I read years ago about how one of the most important qualities in life is resilience. And the person I was talking with, by the way, disagreed with me strongly and said that, when you say that people need to be resilient, you can be justifying stuff that happened in their childhood. And sometimes resilience is built through, say somebody was sexually abused as a child, maybe they learn resilience. And maybe that's why it was suppressed for so long. That was the case they were making. I don't buy it. I just think resilience is really important in society, and I think it's falling apart because I think there's a difference. As you say, there's a difference between persistent and targeted sexual harassment. There's even a difference between casual sexual harassment directed at a person and somebody making an inappropriate joke. We have all been in company at some point where somebody maybe they just misjudge the mood, or they just a little bit on the spectrum, maybe, who knows, says something horrendously inappropriate. Yeah. We've all been there. And, if you're resilient enough, you kind of A, forgive them, and B, kind of move on and laugh about it a couple of weeks later. Or maybe you just form the opinion that guy's a bit of a weirdo and I'll avoid him in future. Yeah. You don't need to destroy I still don't want careers.
I still don't, even if he's a bit of a weirdo, I still don't want him to lose his job.
Yeah.
And the other thing about it as well is that offense and, let's say that the experience of being on the receiving end of let's say sexual harassment, let's call it taking offense, right? It's either real in the moment. It's not retrospective. You can't look back on something now and say, oh, now that hurts my feelings. It either did at the time or it didn't. Do you know what I mean? You can't just look at all these different things from years ago now suddenly in under the modern lens and then reevaluate them and decide now you're offended. So today you're offended about a joke from 17 years ago, but in the moment you probably weren't. You can't do that. You can, and you clearly are, but I think it's immoral because if you and I, in the context of 17 years ago, had a laugh about something, and now I decide today that bothers me. I just think it's human beings who interact with each other. I think well what you're doing. I think that you're being disingenuous. I don't believe it.
Yeah, the other point here is a phrase you mentioned, which is the statute of limitations, which obviously I shouldn't be mansplaining this to the barrister, but maybe for viewers, the statute of limitations is basically a legal device which says that if you're upset by something, you have to take legal action within a set period of time. So, for example, in defamation, if I was to say on this podcast right now something horrendously defamatory about Sarah's husband, he would have 1 year from the date it was published to sue me, and after that, if he hadn't, it falls. Because the basis of that, Sarah, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that after a period of time, memories start to get jumbled and they fade and the ability to mount a defense goes away. So you have to sue in a reasonable time if you're taking this to court. So to try and ruin somebody's career by saying he made a dirty joke 11 years ago, how do we even know you're remembering the joke correctly? That period of time has elapsed. I mean, speak within a reasonable time frame or forever hold your peace. Now, it's different. Look, if we're talking historic child sex abuse here, that doesn't apply for obvious reasons, nor does it apply in law. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about saying somebody made a bad joke 17 years ago. I mean, build a bridge.
But another thing about that, John, is that if he has remained working in MasterChef up until today. So if he was a predator who was saying all these things all the time, you would have more recent examples than 17 years ago. So 17 years ago, in a different time, in a different context, in a different world, let's be honest, where maybe there was more, or no, not maybe, there was probably more, dirty jokes and more people weren't as afraid of their lives of this exact result. So there probably was a bit more. So 17 years ago, but if he was a constant offender in that regard, you'd have more evidence from 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 6 months ago. So 17 years ago, he told a joke, but you've nothing since, and you've decided to ruin his career over it. I think that's no.
The other thing, this business he's in of cooking and all that, it reminds me of people in nature documentaries. Like it's two professions that kind of lend themselves to dirty jokes. Like, anytime I've ever seen a cooking documentary, which is very rarely, it's not my bag. There's always been kind of fruity comments on it. And it's like when you're watching a nature documentary and you hear somebody talking about like what wonderful tits they are in the bush. Like that's the kind of, close your eyes, but that happens. It's the kind of environment that encourages a certain kind of humor as well. Anyway, I just don't buy this story. I don't buy it. I'm over it. I think it's a load of nonsense, but and I think it's very reflective of a culture that has gone a little bit too far in the other direction.
Yeah, why
Disagree
now?
with me if you want.
Why now? 17 years later. I just
caught Sarah's eyes when I was making that joke about birds, and saw her doing the sighing, and she's going to kill me after the show.
Yeah, no, you better believe, John, that 17 years from today, you're going to get a letter from me about that joke, and I'm going to be really upset about it.
Yeah,
I'm just going to decide. I'm going to decide in 17 years that was really offensive.
I'll be done. And now we're going to move on to something just a little bit more somber, maybe, which is the fact that we are voting today on November the 29th, and the British Parliament is also voting on whether to legalise assisted suicide. At the time that we are recording this, nobody knows how that vote will go. It's expected to be too close to call. But I was reading something yesterday that made me think, Sarah, which is how that debate in the UK is so different from the debate here, in that, like, people are being encouraged to give their religious perspectives. Muslims are coming out against it. Jews are coming out against it. Some are coming out for it. Catholics and Protestants. And, being able to debate it is not just a matter of Catholic Church is against it, we're for it, therefore it's good. It really has been an all-encompassing debate involving people on all sides. I mean, Gordon Brown, who had a child who died very suddenly, has been out speaking very movingly about why he's opposed to it. David Cameron, who had a young son die very tragically, has been saying why he's in favour of it. The debate has just been so respectful and so interesting and so open. And I just think, maybe I'll sound like a West Brit, but we really could learn a thing or two about how they've conducted that debate is my overall impression, regardless of how the vote goes.
Well, you know me. I mean, I love the quality of the debate to be high and, to not run screaming into the hills that the other person is a religious, fundamentalist because they don't agree with you. And I think there's a level of maturity that I really would love to see in our development of some of these conversations. I have massive concerns about assisted dying, and that's nothing that aren't based in religion at all. But in Ireland, if I was to go on to, let's just say, RTE primetime and debate against somebody from the, acceptable side of the media, I would be portrayed as a religious nut who, that is entirely basing my opinion on God, and that might not necessarily be the case. So I think that people's stories and people's, opinions on this, like it's a tricky subject, and people have, feelings about it. We've discussed it on the podcast a few times. I remember distinctly discussing that girl who was 20, was she 21 or 23? And she availed of assisted dying because she had depression. And, I have massive concerns about that. I know people who have suffered terribly with depression for years and come through it and, recovered, found a right medical protocol and have come through it and are living a happy life now. So I think that we could very much do with being a bit more mature about the conversation. Do I think we will be? I don't know about that. But I have huge concerns about it. And they're not, I would be hugely concerned that the debate that we will have will never address some of the concerns that people like me will have. It'll always be about a couple of hard cases and, never about 21-year-olds with depression, never about emotional blackmail of your granny because she's got money and you want it, or any of those difficult situations that may or may not arise. It'll never be about that.
Yeah, I mean, I found it very interesting to listen to because, like, I do think there's obviously an argument for assisted suicide that I, for one, kind of find a little bit compelling. That's not to say I agree with it. I absolutely disagree with it. But I mean, if you ask me, do I want to be in my, at any stage of my life, lying there with 6 months to live in great pain? The answer is obviously no.
No.
Somebody puts something before you that says you can end this. Do you want it? Possibly, yes. I mean, if I'm completely honest with myself. But I also think, as I've listened to the debate, there have been a couple of points that have shook me out of that. I saw something Tim Montgomery said. He's a former advisor to Boris Johnson. And he said, look, the thing is, when you bring in assisted suicide, doctors, the amount of killing they do goes up and the amount of caring they do goes down inevitably. And I also think the problem is the slippery slope argument is if it's not real with assisted dying, Sarah, where is it real? Because if you're a 20-year-old paraplegic, paralyzed from the neck down, you're not going to die imminently and you're not in great pain, but you say, I don't want to live a life like this where my head is basically attached to a corpse that I can't move. Like, what is the logic for saying no to him, but saying yes to an 85-year-old who's going to live for 3 months when the 85-year-old who's going to live for 3 months is objectively in a less tragic situation? It's just not there. So the slippery slope must inevitably, as we've seen in every other country, slippery slope must inevitably move until you get to the point where I saw Matthew Parris in the Times writing that he is just in favour of having it on economic grounds. That if we just started bumping people off in the late 70s, we'd save a whole lot of money, and we need to do it because no one's having babies.
I mean,
he's got a point.
Not really.
He's got a point on the economics. I'm just saying. I remember who was that British comedian who did the sketch about Minister? Have you just considered killing the poor? Remember that one? I think it was. It's very funny. Very funny. If you haven't seen it, I'll send it on to you. And if I'm sorry, if our viewers have seen it, post it in the comments below. But yeah, there's a kind of horrifying logic to what he wrote. But he was very open about it. He said, "This is former Conservative MP, now kind of Liberal Democrat leaning, like Matthew Parris." He writes in the Times, and he said, "Look, I'm in favour of it on sort of eugenics and economics grounds. That we have to, as a society, basically encourage the old to shuffle on off because they're being selfish, living their last few years on ventilators, costing us loads and loads of money." He was at least honest.
Just not. I mean, he's honest, but it's sociopathic.
It is, but the thing is, we're talking about slippery slope arguments here, and I think we also talk about what changes the culture. Like, is it just an option you have, or does it become the expected thing that you do? If you're diagnosed with cancer and you're given 9 months to live and you're told it's going to be painful, do the doctors start looking at you and nodding in the direction of the corner where there's the pod there that you climb into and all your worries are ended? I think that's the other thing. The number, I mean, we've seen in Canada, the numbers explode, Sarah, explode every year, going up by literal thousands every year, the people who are availing of this, including some people who are just depressed and homeless. Saves the government getting them a house.
That is dark. That is dark.
All right. Look, we'll leave it there. We'll leave it there on all of the topics and get to, I mean, if you've been sitting here patiently waiting for mine and Sarah's take on the election and what the result will be, we've been trying to cheat to not record this until the MRP poll comes out so we can present those predictions as ours, but we haven't made it. So these are going to have to be genuine and legitimate. Sarah, we'll start with you. What do you think is going to happen and why?
Right. So I've never in my memory of, watching and observing elections, and I've been a nerdy observer of elections for a long, long time. There's never been a more boring campaign, and there's never been a campaign harder to call, I think. So the first thing is, obviously, when the campaign started, I thought that Fine Gael were going to have a really good election. I no longer think that. But I think that Sinn Féin are going to have a bit of a bet. I think Mary Lou pulled it back a little bit, particularly in the last week. So I think that what we're potentially going to end up with is an unbelievably boring result where we plus or minus 5 for Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil and Sinn Féin and ultimately end up with roughly the same. I think Aintu are going to have a good day, but it's very hard to call until you sit down. Like, it's very hard to pick up where the gains are going to come. I think Independent Ireland are going to make a few gains. But ultimately, I think that the result, we've had, like in elections, we've had the Green Wave, we've had the Sinn Féin thumping day, the last general election, etc. I don't feel like there's any kind of momentum behind. There's a bit of momentum behind Aintu, fine, but like it's not really momentum if you have one TD, and you might they'd be having an amazing day if they came back with like 7. You know what I mean? I don't think there's going to be any big story. Like, I mean, people can say Fine Gael have had a terrible campaign, and they did, but you're talking about, them maybe going into third or second place after Fianna Fáil in terms of the number of TDs, but there's not going to be any drama. Like, I really don't see a situation where Fine Gael are doing so badly they're going into opposition. You do.
Don't really hear a prediction there.
So my prediction is that I think Fianna Fáil are going to gain about 8 seats.
Mm-hmm.
That's my loose calculation. I think Fine Gael are going to gain about 2.
Okay.
And I think Sinn Féin I thought they were going to lose about 8. I think they're going to maybe lose 2 or something.
Okay.
I think independents are going to make some gains. I think Aintu's going to make a couple of gains. I think Independent Ireland are going to make a couple of gains. And that's it. I think it's going to be boring.
Your maths are off.
Your
maths are off. You've Sinn Féin losing 2 and you've everyone else making gains. Now, there are more seats this time. The Dáil is up from 165 to 174. But, yeah. I think Fine Gael are going to lose seats. I'm just going to say that.
Do you?
You can mark it down. I think they're going to lose seats. I think as the campaign has gone on, I think they've gotten into more and more difficulty. I think the problem is that they had an underlying weakness there before the campaign started, which was poor candidates. Sorry, not poor candidates. Some of their candidates are okay, I guess. There's a lot of poor ones. I mean, new candidates. Their TDs have retired. So I think in place like Cavan Monaghan, I think the retirement of Heather Humphreys is going to devastate them. Now, they've only one seat there, and I think they'll just about hold it. But I think similar in other parts of the country, where Fine Gael are suddenly looking at a retirement, places like Donegal, for example. I find it very hard to see Fine Gael holding its seat in Donegal with Joe McHugh having retired, looking at the lie of the land up there. I think Sinn Féin are on for 2, Fianna Fáil are in with a very good shot for 2, and there's an independent there with Thomas Pringle, who's likely to hold his seat. And there's the guy from the Micah campaign. So I think, for example, in that constituency, I think Fine Gael are going to be in real difficulty to hold their seat.
But when you say, so with the additional seats, when you say lose, do you mean lose? How many seats do Fine Gael have today?
No, it's in the mid-30s. Let me have a look, because I need to check after the by-election. No, what I mean is we're not to do that live. We should have done beforehand. But I think Fine Gael are actually going to lose seats compared to the 2020 election. I think they will do very well if they come away plus or minus nothing. But I think it'll be a net loss when you consider the gain in seats. I mean, they will have dropped several percentage points in the opinion polls. And I was looking at the transfer patterns in the Ireland Thinks Behaviour and Attitude. So the Ireland Thinks Sunday Independent poll released at the weekend, where Fine Gael are doing really badly on transfers.
Yeah.
Like Fianna Fáil are getting a lot more transfers from Fine Gael and vice versa. Independent voters not really transferring to Fine Gael. And if your first preference vote is lower than the Fianna Fáil vote or the Sinn Féin vote, you're going to see a lot of Fine Gael candidates struggling to get across the line.
Yeah, and that's where I think Fianna Fáil are going to pick up. Fianna Fáil are going to pick them up because Fianna Fáil are getting transfers from Independent Ireland, they're getting transfers from Aintu, they're getting transfers across the board that Fine Gael just aren't. So that's why I think Fianna Fáil are going to make some gains.
But they won't be deserved gains. I think Fianna Fáil are going to make gains on the basis of our electoral system. I think they're going to make gains from hanging around towards the end of counts and picking up seats they probably shouldn't, because they're the most transfer friendly of the 3 government parties.
Yeah.
I think that's what's going to happen.
And Micheál will claim that it's an endorsement of the direction he's taken Fianna Fáil in, but that's a conversation for another day.
So,
but I think
sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, go on. I think
go
go ahead on the numbers.
Yeah, of the three big parties, I think we're both agreed, aren't we, that Fianna Fáil now look absolutely. I mean, this is not shocking prediction stuff, folks, but we're both now agreed that Fianna Fáil look likely to emerge as the largest party. With then Sinn Féin and Fine Gael in a race to see who can come third, essentially, by doing worse than the other. That's because this is the other thing. I don't buy this Sinn Féin recovery narrative, Sarah. I don't know if you do. I just don't buy it.
No,
I don't buy it at all. I mean, I was talking to people in Tipperary South where they're fighting to hold a seat with Martin Brown, who just don't think they're going to do it. I was talking to people in Dublin Bay South, your father's old constituency, where they don't think Chris Andrews is going to hold that. I haven't heard many seats where I've heard talk of reliable Sinn Féin gains. Waterford maybe is one, and Dublin South Central another, but very few.
Yeah, I think Dublin Bay South is a good example. Like Chris Andrews would have featured in every box across the constituency the last time when, trying not to sneeze, when Sinn Féin would have been doing exceptionally well, and I just don't think that's there anymore. So I think he'll struggle. The only thing going in his favour is that, you know, if you think James Geoghegan is going to take a seat, and Jim O'Callaghan are probably going to take a seat, and Ivana Bacik is probably going to take a seat, then there's one seat left. Is Chris Andrews going to poll better than Hazel Chu? I mean,
these are all things that we shall find out, of course.
But then there's other. So if you get into a couple of constituency specific things, I think Roderick O'Gorman has a good chance of losing his seat. I think Holly Kearns has got a good chance of losing her seat. I don't think the Hutch is going to take a seat. I just don't think the vote will be there. I think he'll get about 1,500 votes. I don't think Kate O'Connell is going to feature. I think she's going to get about 1,500 votes. I'd like to think that I'll obviously be amused if the Hutch gets more votes than Kate O'Connell, considering she's been on every media outlet as the lovey that she is, and in an independent no less, and got more coverage than any other candidate that I can think of, certainly any independent candidate. I don't think she's going to poll particularly well. My feedback on the ground in the constituency there is that she won't. So I think that there's specific little things that will be interesting. The Hutch is a good one.
I'm going to relay a story about Jerry the Monk Hutch that was shared with Ben and I.
Keep saying the Hutch, and people give out to me. It's the Monk. Fine.
The Monk, yes.
Yeah.
See, I subtly fixed that for you.
Thanks.
It was good co-hosting. But a member of the Oireachtas relayed to Ben and I this story about a relative of theirs who is in the the north inner city. And the door is knocked, and he opens it, and there's Jerry the Monk Hutch saying, "Will you give me an aisle number 1?" And your man says, "Oh, I will, of course, Jerry. Absolutely, 100% give you the number 1. And this politician said to their relative, "Well, why did you say that?" He said, "Well, I was hardly going to tell him I wasn't going to vote for him, was I?" With the implication being, that might be a dangerous
couldn't possibly
activity.
Comment on the implication. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I just thought that was very funny. Can we talk about Gráinne Seoga?
Yeah. I'm gonna. Well, you tell me your prediction because I have one myself.
Yeah, I don't think she's going to take a seat. I was talking in the manner Ivan Yates does this a lot. He's kind of like, I was talking to a fella on the ground. I genuinely was talking to a fella on the ground in Galway West.
Yeah.
Who was telling me that, it's just not going over well with the voters. And I think it's something I've noticed, or actually more something I haven't noticed. Like, am I wrong? Or like, where is the photograph of Micheál Martin canvassing at Gráinne Seoga in the campaign?
Yeah, I haven't seen it. And I've seen him canvassing with a good few people, particularly women. In fairness, he's got an unbelievable drive and energy, and he goes canvassing. He loves an L canvas. So he's always canvassing. He loves an L canvas. And so he is, like, to give credit to him where it's due, he is always out canvassing with candidates. Like, I see him all over my social media. So, like, I have friends who are female who are running, or male, but I have friends who are running for Fianna Fáil, and I follow them on Instagram, and he's out pressing the flesh morning, noon and night with people, but I've never seen anything with him with Gráinne Seoga. I might have missed it, but I haven't seen it.
I might have missed it too, but obviously in this job I pay fairly close attention. I mean, I'm not saying I haven't missed it. I'm just saying that I get all the Fianna Fáil press releases. Well, recently enough, I get all the Fianna Fáil press releases. They were slow at the start of the campaign, so it was in the first week I might have missed it. But there's been nothing. And you would have thought, wouldn't you, that would have been like an obvious one. for him to go and have the arm around Grania and be cancelling. But yeah, I've just heard that campaign has been very, very poor, and that has just not gone well at all. So I think you've heard similarly, haven't you?
Yeah,
we look like some just now. She tops the poll.
Yeah, I know. Well, I'm not there. We're not there, but I have somebody, and I've said on the podcast before, I have some good familial links in Galway and people that I know in Galway, and I've spoken to them and asked them, and on more than one occasion, I've been told that there's a likability problem.
Well, let's move on to because the people who could be beneficiaries, because we've talked about the three big parties, and I think we're all agreed that they've collectively, if you look at the Sunday Independent poll at the weekend, they've collectively lost 7% from 2024. Sorry, from 2020 to 2024. So in the final Red C poll in 2020, I think it was 24, 24, 21. And this time it was like 21, 21, 20. So they lost a collective 7% between them. And that 7% seems to have gone basically everywhere. But yeah. I think it is going to be Independence Day. I think, and I'm including in that Independent Ireland, because I think Noel Thomas has a great chance of a seat in that very same constituency in Galway West. I think you've got people like, I'm sorry, I've forgotten his name, the chap in Dublin, Rathdown, Michael Fleming, who could take a final seat there, which no one would have thought that constituency would elect an independent a month ago. I think of people like Jim Ryan in my own backyard here in Tipperary. Sharon Keoghan was telling me yesterday about a whole range of independent candidates she's been working with and mentoring, who she thinks have very good chances in places like Mayo even and Galway East. And some of these people are under the radar. And then you've got the whole slew. You've got the Aontú factor, and you've got the kind of anti-immigration factor with groups like the National Alliance, and Gavin Pepper and Malachy Steenson and what have you. How do you think, we'll start with that last group, how do you think they will do? Do you think they'll take a seat anywhere?
I don't think it's beyond the realms of possibility that Gavin Pepper takes a seat. I just think isn't it a 3-seater?
Mm-hmm.
3-seaters are hard, you know? You really have to be in there at the beginning. And what I think that the difficulty some of the likes of Gavin Pepper will run into is that the person who's voting for Gavin Pepper is voting for Gavin Pepper number 1, but who's voting for Gavin Pepper number 2? I just think that he might have a transfer problem, but I think he'll poll well regardless. I couldn't call it, but I've also seen on social media that Gavin Pepper has run a campaign. You know, he is out there. He's got a old school mobile, what's it called?
Billboard.
No, he's got a van where he does like constituency clinics.
Yes. Yeah, mobile clinic.
Yeah, a mobile clinic. And sorry, I dropped one of my headphones there, John.
Well, while you're finding your headphones,
I'm having a mare with these headphones today. But I think that, and I think Malachy Steenson will be the same. I think the problem for Malachy is that it's bad news for Malachy when Claire Daly and the Monk all entered the fray there. It's a very crowded field.
It's just, there's another thing too. There's a difference between these two candidates. They're always pitched together. And I'm not saying anything for or against either of them. But if you look at their local election results, Gavin Pepper performed substantially more strongly than Malachy Steenson did. Malachy Steenson in that North Inner City Ward in Dublin City Council, he took about the 5th seat or something with, 1,300 votes on the first count, or maybe even fewer than that. Like it was a good local election performance to take a seat, but it wasn't the kind of local election performance that if you repeat it in a general election gets you elected. And once you get out of that award, Dublin Central becomes a much different place. You head up the Navan Road into far leafier areas where Pascal Donoghue gets his votes and what have you. And I think it gets hard I think there's very little path for Malachy Steenson to a seat. He could prove me entirely wrong. And if he does, I'll be the first to shake his hand. But I think there's very little path. Gavin Pepper, there's a real path. There's a real path because I have done this, the sums on this. If you add up the votes cast in the local elections for Gavin Pepper and candidates like him, or even more right-wing than him, about 4,500, 5,000 votes in that constituency. And if he gets the bulk of those, he is going to be in contention on the first count at least. But I think you're right, he'll have a transfer problem. But he is, I think his prospects are much, much stronger than Malachy Steenson's. I think people often put them together because they got elected together and they're quite friendly and so on. But I think in terms of electoral prospects, his are much stronger. Then the other guy in that kind of sphere, that kind of, nationalist rights sphere, we'll call it, is Derek Blythe down in Cork. And he is just, I think, going to run into the buzzsaw that is Ken O'Flynn's campaign for Independent Ireland, which is going to draw from the same kind of pool of voters, would have much more appeal to the middle ground as well. So I think Gavin Pepper is the best shot in that sort of sphere for a seat.
And do you think that there's a cohort of voters in this campaign who are just going to go in and vote for independent, whoever they are, don't care, just voting independent? Like, do you think that's a bulk of vote?
Well, I think it is in every campaign, right? Independents never do much worse than about 10, 12. I think the last time they got about 12% of the vote, and polls this time have them nearly at 20% of the vote. So that's a huge block.
Well, my thing, it obviously it depends on the constituency, but like before it would have been, you had your mainstream parties, your obvious parties, and then you would have had independents. And now you have independents. You have Independent Ireland, which aren't strictly independent, but they're as close as. Then you have Ain 2. There's other options or something. It just feels like there's more choice. I'd be worried about the vote splitting. Like, if you look at the Euros in Dublin, there was Niall Boylan, there was also Malachy, there was Ain 2, Considine. There was a lot of options, and that, I would just wonder about that repeating itself in constituency by constituency again. In other words, that there's definitely a quota of votes there if you combine it all together. When it starts splitting all the way, left, right and centre, pardon the pun, you don't get anything.
Eminently possible. Look, I mean, no one's been banging this drum more than me for the last couple of years, right? About splitting the vote and uniting. If you are of that mind, you should be uniting into like maximum 2 or 3 coherent parties with coherent policies. On the sort of hardest fringe of the right, they've done that to some degree with the National Alliance, where they're not running against each other and they're running one candidate in, I think, 30 odd constituencies or something like that. So it's not as bad as it was in the local elections. But yeah, there'll be some of that. But there's also, as we said in our editorial today about the election, the other good thing here is that there is a candidate on every ballot paper. Every single ballot paper will have at least one candidate who kind of, as I put it in the editorial, or as we put it in the editorial, I didn't draft it all, but I drafted this bit. Like, people who joined the chorus of the questioning over the last 5 years, as opposed to like the choir of the conforming. The people who raise questions about COVID, people who raise questions about immigration, people who raise questions about the referendums earlier on this year. I mean, on that issue alone, there's an A2 candidate in every constituency. If you're annoyed about the referendums, they were the only party to stand up and raise a question. If you're annoyed about the hate speech bill, there are people like Independent Ireland and indeed the aforementioned A2 and a whole bunch of independents who you can go and put your vote beside. So there's an option in every constituency if you, like us, are sick of the conformity on every issue. And this is what our editorial said, is like, whoever you vote for people who will at least bring a different perspective into the new Dáil, whether they're in government or in opposition. And there is that option on every ballot paper in this election. So I think that's important to say.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously want, independents to get elected, because I think that we have to have more people in the Dáil who are, willing to stand up and argue the alternative on a number of issues. And I really, there's obviously particular people that I'm going to be watching intensely, like Elaine Mullally in Laois, who is a very strong independent candidate. She's a woman. She's really smart. She's really good. And she's run a really good campaign. We were talking about it the other night, like out knocking on doors morning, noon and night. Like, she's run a strong campaign. And I really hope she gets elected.
Yes.
And she's in a strong position, because this will be the constituency where Brian Stanley is from. So he's now running as an independent. But she's in a strong position, I think. I'd love her to get elected. This, as you know, and anybody who watches politics knows, there'll be just certain races you'll watch more intensely than others. Do you know what I mean? Like, you might watch Galway because you're curious about Gráinne Seoga. I'll be watching Laois because I'm rooting for Elaine Mullally. I'll be watching Dublin Bay South because I'll be rooting for a number of people to not get elected there. I'm more interested in people not in people losing than winning in that particular one. But you know what I mean? Like, there's ones you're more interested in than others. And I think there's a lot of people who are independents who are really good. Ken O'Flynn is another one. Shane P. O'Reilly. I'd love to see, get elected to the Dáil. They've worked hard. They've been good, very, very good councillors for years. So there's, I'd love to see some change. I really would. But I think it's been such a boring campaign. I'm a bit concerned about turnout. And I'd be a bit concerned about just, plus or minus 5 for Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil and Sinn Féin, but largely no real change.
Well, that would be funny. That would be funny if after all the Sturm and Drang of the last 5 years, the result was basically identical to the last time, which is a distinct possibility, I should say. Can I just say something on Elaine Mullally? Which is that 3-seaters are damn hard, Sarah.
Yeah,
for people sitting at home to understand how a quota is worked out. A quota is basically the total number of seats plus 1, and then the total valid votes divided by that. So essentially, you need to be guaranteed of a seat in a 3-seater. You need a quarter of the votes. That's a very big ask for a first-time candidate. I'm just going to say that. And I it's not that I wanted to pour cold water on your evening, because you may well be calling it right and I may be calling it wrong. But if she was to threaten a seat there, it would be an enormous personal achievement. I think next door, actually, somebody who we barely ever mentioned, who is reputedly cruising in a similar scenario, was Carol Nolan, who a lot of people, when the boundaries were announced, wrote her off and said, well, that's her gone. And by all accounts, what my sources there tell me are is that she's not in any danger at all. She'll cruise home, which is a significant achievement.
Well, that's good.
There's
how do you think Labour and the Soc Dems are going to do? Labour first.
Oh, that's impossible to call. I think Alan Kelly is going to be safe here in Tipperary North. He has run a very effective campaign. He has run a campaign that hasn't in any way, basically, that might as well not have been a national Labour Party campaign. I think that's
he's barely Labour now, in fairness.
Yeah. He's got the backing of a couple of good local councillors. He will be transfer friendly. I think he's fine. I think Labour will neither advance forward nor go back. I think they will, for example, they will lose a seat in Dublin Bay North, where Aodhán Ó Ríordáin has removed himself both from Twitter and the Oireachtas and gone off to Europe and Blue Sky. We miss him so. And so they lose a seat there. And then they have a candidate up in Dublin Fingal West, whose name escapes me at the moment, but a very effective councillor up there who's a real chance of a gain for them. So I think they'll basically stand still. Soc Dems, I mean, I was looking around the country and I was like, where are the Soc Dem gains if they're going to get to 10, 11, 12 seats? And if they're there, they'll be a surprise. But I don't see that. I don't see many of their sitting TDs in a whole lot of trouble. I think Jennifer Whitmore is fine in Wicklow. I think Gary Gannon is probably a favourite to hold on in Dublin Central in what will be a messy transfer-filled race, but I think he'll be transfer-friendly, particularly from the left. I think they will overall, that Green Soc Dem Labour grouping will fall back a bit, mainly because the Greens are in such trouble. I have the Greens holding 2 seats. I have them taking Hazel Chew, winning that seat in Dublin Bay South. And I just about have Catherine Martin holding on in Dublin Rathdown.
So you think that the Green Party after this general election is Hazel Chew and Catherine Martin?
And if you think about that, folks, if you don't like the Green Party, that might actually be worse for them than if they won no seats at all.
Yeah. So does that mean that on your prediction for Dublin Bay South that Hazel Chew wins and little Chrissy Andrews doesn't?
Yes, I would have that as a Fine Gael gain from Sinn Féin. I would have that Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, Labour, Green. Straightforward. I think they are the 4 candidates who will be in the top 4 positions on the first count, and I think they will also drive most of the transfers. I think Chris Andrews will struggle. That's what I think. But who knows?
But yeah, I mean, I think that the Green losses, if you think about it, will in multiple constituencies will be kingmakers for a Soc Dem or a Labour person when they go out, because they obviously transfer well to each other. But so you don't think that Holly Kearns is in danger of losing her seat then?
I don't think she's in as much danger as she was a week ago before Fine Gael slumped in the polls, because her danger there is Fine Gael. And if Fine Gael support has fallen back to below where it was in 2020, that's not to say, I mean, maybe in the local area down there it's surged, but I'd be feeling a little bit more confident about her. But yeah, no, she's in some difficulty. But I mean, those 3 seats have got to go somewhere. And she's a sitting TD, which helps. She's the leader of a party. She's got a sympathy vote because she's pregnant. Who knows? I suppose we did say we'd make a prediction. So I'm going to predict she just about hangs on. There you go. Based on a similar pattern to the last time where she gets transfers from Sinn Féin and various other smaller left.
So just no seat for Fine Gael in that constituency?
They're running 2 candidates, which I always thought was a dumb idea. That's the one thing. I mean, they went from 2 seats to 1 seat to no seat. So I think if you've got no seat and you want 1 seat back, you should run one good candidate, right? But they split their vote. And some of that will bleed apart. And you never know what the order of eliminations will do or or who will go out first or anything like that. It's a risky strategy. And it was a good strategy or a defensible strategy for when they thought they were going to be holding 27, 28% of the election. But now they could be polling 19 or 20% of the election. And it's no longer such a good strategy. I could be totally wrong. Maybe they've run a great campaign down there in that constituency and they take the seat and Holly Kearns goes home. We don't know. But if you asked me to call it, I would say she would be slightly favourite right now to hang on, which I didn't think about 2 weeks ago.
I think that second Fine Gael candidate going out pushes the other one ahead of her. That's what I think.
All right. Well, we should find out. The one thing I am fairly confident about is that Roderick O'Gorman will struggle to hold his seat in Dublin West. I think
for the gain of whom?
Literally anybody else. I just think it's that I just think he is in trouble. I mean, the problem is that the Greens got a lot of seats the last time because they stayed ahead of that Labour Party, People for Profit, Social Democrat, left-wing independent pack. And I think the problem is on first preferences, you fall back into that pack. It only takes one of them to get ahead of you, and all of a sudden you're electing them rather than them electing you. That's how our system works. And I just think that the Green Party's first preference vote in the opinion polls is down at 2-3%. That is not consistent with taking a seat in Dublin West if those polls are correct. It's just not. That's not where their vote is generally concentrated. They concentrate their vote in the leafy South Dublin constituencies and maybe places like Cork South Central and maybe places like Galway City. They've never concentrated their vote in kind of more commutery parts of the city like Dublin West. So I think if the polls are accurate and they're down at sort of 3-4%, bear in mind they got 10-ish the last time, or 8 to 10-ish, that bodes very ill for Roderick O'Gorman. And I also think he's another kind of like Gavin Pepper. He's kind of electoral marmite. You're either voting number one for him. I don't think he's going to be as transfer friendly as the regular Green.
But do you not think that the Greens kind of barely ran a campaign at all? They gave up.
They ran a campaign very targeted at their own voters. And I think this was the only thing they could do.
Like they 4 of them?
Yeah, well.
I mean, they ran a campaign which was like, to me, well, I mean, by the way, none of the campaigns are particularly good, but they ran a campaign that was really like, we did stuff, I just don't feel like they think they're getting elected at all. So by your maths then, I'm thinking you have, is it Ossian or Oisin Smith? Who's in Dún Laoghaire?
That lad.
You have
I don't think he's going to win.
So who makes the gain?
So I think that one is going to be between somebody like the Labour Party or Fine Gael taking a second seat there at Barry Ward.
Interesting. So many interesting races, but it's really tricky to call. That's what I mean. It's an unusual election.
It will depend. I mean, yeah, it will depend. It's one of those ones. I mean, we'll be able to say a whole lot more when you join us on Saturday morning at the count because we'll have some actual data in front of us. And Sarah will be able to go full nerd. She loves going full nerd. She'll have the glasses on. She'll be buried in. She'll be looking and saying, these are the votes from this box and this is why I think it's going to happen. And it'll be far more interesting than simply speculating about it.
And I am often, and as are you, willing to make calls early, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
Like I'm not a too close to call person. I will be like there are places in Dublin Bay South, I know them so well that I will be able to call at 9:20 if Chris Andrews is getting elected or not.
Okay, I will be willing to do that.
I will be willing to do that.
Tune in for the result on Saturday morning of the Dublin-based South election before anyone else has it, because Sarah will tell you what it is. And join us for our live stream on Saturday morning. But until then, we have gone just about the hour, which is as long as we like to keep you. So thank you very much for listening to us. I kind of feel like we kind of half-assed those predictions a bit, but you know what? We're not perfect, and we simply don't know. We don't know what's going to happen because it's been so boring.
Well, in our defence, our prediction is this: plus or minus 5 across the board, but nothing really.
Nothing seismic.
Nothing seismic. I mean, it's not like I'll eat my hat if it comes out that, you know, Soc Dems win 30 seats or something mad like that. I just don't feel any momentum behind anything. So I think it's a few tinkering around the edges, basically. A few, like in a lot of constituencies, you can see like that one person is going to lose, but the other candidate, say for Fine Gael or Fianna Fáil, is going to win. So it's like plus or minus nothing. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of that. So I just think it's going to be, the result is going to be some interesting pockets of like individual stories or whatever. But not that interesting.
Yeah. All right. We'll leave it there. We'll see you on Saturday morning for the count. If you want to join us, we'll be back next week. Thankfully, we'll just be back to the one episode a week, because I know some of you are getting sick of looking at us, but we're very glad that you've been sticking with us during the election and indeed the tough times we've been having recently. So from Sarah and from me, thank you. Good afternoon, and we'll see you tomorrow morning. Take care.